The air was cold and wet, heavy with the smell of rust and something rotten. Dim green lights flickered along the curved walls of the underground tunnel. Water dripped from pipes above, falling into a shallow pool that covered the floor. Somewhere, in that water, chained to the metal ground, lay an alien girl. Her eyes opened slowly, the pupils narrowing at the sudden sting of light. For a moment, she did not know where she was. The last thing she remembered was running from something in the shadows. Now her body felt heavy, her wrists and ankles locked in thick black chains, her skin-tight purple suit soaked through. Her breathing came hard, her heart pounding as she realized the truth: she was pregnant. Her hands trembled as they touched her swollen belly. She had no idea how much time had passed. Fear tightened her chest. This was not a place meant for life. This was a prison. Then she heard the sound that froze her blood. A scraping noise, slow, deliberate. Something moving closer in the darkness beyond the lights. She turned her head, and in the far corner, two glowing green eyes appeared. Day. Blinked once, then began to move toward her, their owner stepping into the dim light. It was the monster, tall, thin, and twisted. Its black skeletal frame gleamed under the wet light. Its head was smooth and metallic, its jaw lined with teeth that caught the green glow. It moved like liquid shadow, each step sending small ripples through the water. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew what it wanted. Her pulse raced. She could not scream loud enough for anyone to hear her down here. The tunnels went on for miles, deep under the surface. Her only hope was the tiny emergency transmitter hidden in the seam of her suit. One more suit. One. She had promised herself never to use unless she was near death. She took a deep breath and pressed her wrist against the chain, forcing it to press the small hidden button. A faint hum vibrated against her skin as the device came to life. A weak signal left her body and disappeared into the cold air, carrying a silent message of desperation. Help me, please. The monster stopped for a moment, its head turning, as if it sensed something. It stepped closer, lowering itself, its sharp fingers tracing the chain that bound her. The girl's body tensed, every muscle ready to fight. But she knew she couldn't win. Her signal was weak. Almost no one could detect alien frequency this deep underground. But she sent it again, forcing her mind to focus, pushing out her fear. Help. Anyone. Above ground, far away in a small repair station, a human sat at his desk. His name was Jake Carter, a late-night engineer working alone. The old radio scanner on his desk hissed with static, as it always did when he left it running for background noise. But then, for the first time in years, the static broke. A faint sound came through. Not words, more like a trembling voice hidden in the hum of static. He frowned and leaned closer. The pitch was strange, the pattern, almost like an encoded alien distress signal. He had heard of such things before, but only in old war stories. Jake reached for the controls and tuned the signal, isolating it from the noise. The voice became clearer, soft, almost breaking, filled with fear. And then, just for a second, it felt like the voice spoke directly to him. Help me. Please. Jake sat back in his chair, the hair on his arms standing up. Could be nothing, just a glitch, a false reading. But deep down, something told him it was real. In the tunnel below, the alien girl kept her eyes on the monster. It was closer now, crouching just a few feet away. Its breath slow, like it was enjoying the fear it caused. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might hear it. She sent the signal again. Above, Jake's hands hovered over the controls. He could trace the source. It came from deep below, an abandoned industrial sector, a place marked on maps as "Do Not Enter." The monster's claws scraped against the metal floor as it leaned over her, its green eyes reflecting in the shallow water. She stared back at it, her lips trembling. But inside, she kept repeating the same hope over and over: someone will hear me. Someone will come. In that moment, far above, Jake made his choice. He grabbed his flashlight, his tool bag, and an old sidearm from the locker. If the signal was real, then someone down there needed him. The girl didn't know it yet, but her faint SOS had reached the only human willing to listen. And he was already on his way into the dark. Jake Carter sat in the cramped control room of the old surface repair station. A mug of cold coffee sitting untouched beside him. It had been another long night of routine maintenance, monitoring power lines, checking water filtration stats, and running diagnostics on machinery that hadn't been upgraded in decades. Nothing exciting ever happened out here. The place was so far from the main colonies that most people didn't even know it existed. But tonight was different. That strange voice still echoed in his head. It hadn't been in English, and yet, somehow, he understood the feeling behind its: fear, exhaustion, and desperation. The scanner's green screen still flickered faintly with the alien frequency. A thin wave dancing across the monitor like a heartbeat. Jake leaned closer, twisting the dial again. The static shifted, then broke for a split second. He could hear her voice more clearly this time, faint, shaking, and filled with a kind of terror that made his stomach knot. "Help me. Please." He blinked, his hand frozen on the dial. This wasn't some automated beacon, it was personal. Someone was alive down there. And if he didn't move fast, they wouldn't be for long. He reached for the console, running a quick triangulation. Scan. The source lit up on the display, deep underground. Far beneath an old mining complex that had been sealed off after a cave-in years ago. That area wasn't just abandoned, was dangerous. The files he'd read on it were clear. Unstable tunnels, toxic gases, and reports of unidentified life forms. Jake could almost hear his old instructor's voice in his head. If you ever pick up a distress call from the lower sectors, you turn it in and stay out of it. Don't be a hero. But what if he was the only one who could hear it? What if he was the only one who would even care? The voice came through again, even softer this time, almost fading into the static. The way it quivered made him feel like he was standing right there in the dark with her. He imagined what kind of place she must be in, lone, cold, and hopeless. Jake shut off the station's main lights, grabbed his flashlight, and pulled open the old weapons locker. Inside was a small plasma sidearm, barely functional, but better than nothing. He strapped it to his leg and threw a coil of rope into his bag. Tools, water, and a portable oxygen mask followed. He hesitated at the door, glancing back at the blinking scanner. The signal was so faint now, he could barely pick it up. Whatever was happening down there, it was getting worse. With one last, deep breath, he stepped outside into the cold night air. The stars above were sharp and bright. But the land ahead was nothing but black hills and broken structures, silent as the grave. The old mining sector was nearly 2 miles away. Jake moved fast, his boots crunching on the gravel path, his flashlight beams sweeping over rusted signs and collapsed fencing. The closer he got, the heavier the air felt, carrying the faint scent of something metallic and foul. When he reached the entrance to the sector, he found a massive steel gate welded shut. A weathered warning plate was bolted to the front. D. Not enter, extreme hazard. Beneath it, in smaller letters, official access only by order of Colonial Safety Council. Jake smirked under his breath. He'd never been good at following orders. He pulled out his plasma cutter and began slicing through the old lock. Sparks hissed in the night air, lighting up the gate for a moment before the lock gave way with a snap. The heavy gate groaned as he pushed it open just far enough to slip through. Inside, the ground sloped downward into darkness. Broken rails from the old mining carts lined the path. Strange claw marks scratched into the metal walls caught his eye. They were deep, too deep for any tool he'd seen. The faint signal on his handheld tracker pulsed again, leading him deeper into the tunnels. The temperature dropped with each step, the air becoming damp and thick. Somewhere far below, water dripped steadily. Echoing like a slow heartbeat, Jake kept one hand on his sidearm, his ears straining for any sound that wasn't his own breathing. He didn't know what kind of life forms people had claimed. To see down here, but the deeper he went, the more he believed those stories might have been true. The signal strengthened. His pulse quickened. Somewhere ahead, in the belly of the earth, a girl's voice was still calling for help. Jake stopped. For a moment, switching off his flashlight. The darkness swallowed him completely. In the silence, he thought he heard something faint, a chain rattling, followed by a low growl that didn't sound human at all. He switched the light back on and took a deep breath. He had come too far to turn back now. Whatever was waiting for him in those tunnels, whatever had trapped her there, he was going to find it. And he wasn't leaving without her. The mouth of the tunnel yawned before Jake like the open jaws of some ancient beast. A cold wind seemed to breathe out of the darkness, carrying with it the heavy stench of rust, stagnant water, and something sharp and acidic that burned in his nose. His flashlight's narrow beam cut into the black, revealing jagged rock walls lined with broken metal supports. Somewhere deep inside, the faint SOS signal still pulsed on his handheld tracker, urging him forward. He tightened his grip on the light and stepped inside. The ground beneath his boots was slick with a thin layer of water, every step sending out ripples that echoed down the tunnel. The sound was unnerving. Felt like the walls themselves were listening. The deeper Jake went, the more alien the structure became. At first, it looked like an old human mining shaft, but soon the walls shifted from rough stone to smooth black alloy, marked with strange flowing symbols that shimmered faintly under his beam. They weren't carved, they seemed grown into the surface, like veins of living metal. Jake paused to study them, his breath misting in the cold air. What the hell built this? He muttered under his breath. A distant clang answered him. His flashlight swept across the tunnel ahead, but there was nothing, just the empty curve disappearing into more shadow. He moved cautiously, the sound of his own heartbeat loud in his ears. The tracker beeped softly in his hand. He was getting closer. The path opened into a larger chamber, and Jake froze. Half buried in the walls were rusted mining carts, twisted beyond recognition. Deep gouges marred the floor-long, jagged scratches, as if something with enormous claws had been dragged through here. He crouched down to examine one of the grooves, running his fingers over its sharp edges. Whatever made it was strong and recent. The metal was still flaking at the touch. A faint movement at the edge of his vision made him snap his head up. His flashlight caught the brief shimmer of water dripping from above, splashing into a narrow pool. The ripples spread slowly across the chamber, and then stopped too soon, as if something beneath the water had stilled them. Jake stepped back, his free hand resting on the grip of his sidearm. Easy, he whispered to himself. He skirted around the pool, keeping his light low. Beyond it, another tunnel sloped sharply downward. A sickly green glow bled from somewhere deep within, painting the walls in ghostly colors. That glow felt wrong and natural, almost like the kind of emergency lighting you might find in a prison. The air grew heavier as he descended. Every breath felt thick, damp, and cold. The metal walls seemed to sweat, droplets running down into cracks in the floor. He could hear the faint hum of some distant machinery, and underneath it, something else. A slow, wet scraping sound. The tracker beeped louder now. He was close. The tunnel suddenly narrowed, forcing him to squeeze through. A jagged break in the wall. On the other side, The space opened into a massive chamber at least 20 meters across. His beam swept the room and caught sight of heavy chains bolted to the floor in the center. They snaked outward into the shadows, disappearing into ankle-deep water. He stepped closer, and that's when he saw it movement at the end of one of the chains. A figure curled on the wet metal floor, its body shaking the alien girl. Even from this distance, he could see her silver-white hair clinging to her face, her purple bodysuit torn and soaked. She was breathing hard, her arms wrapped around her swollen belly as if protecting it. Her eyes were half closed, but when his flashlight swept over her, they opened just enough for her to see him. For a moment, her gaze locked on his. Confusion, fear, and a faint spark of hope flickered there. Jake opened his mouth to speak. A low growl rolled through the chamber, freezing him in place. From the far corner, something massive shifted in the shadows. His flashlight caught the glint of wet black metal, then to glowing green eyes. They blinked slowly, locking on him. The monster stepped forward, its skeletal frame towering over the girl. Long, segmented limbs ended in curved claws that scraped against the floor. Its head tilted, as if curious about this new intruder. Jake's heart slammed in his chest. He knew one thing instantly: this was no accident. The girl wasn't just trapped here. She was being kept. The monster took another step, the water rippling around its legs. Jake's grip tightened on his sidearm. The tracker in his hand went silent. The signal no longer mattered. He had found her. Now the real problem was getting her out alive. Jake's finger hovered over the trigger of his sidearm. But he didn't fire. The monster stood between him and the chained alien girl, its black, skeletal frame gleaming under the sickly green. Light water dripped from its long claws, each drop splashing into the shallow pool with an almost rhythmic tap. Tap, 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 tap. Its glowing eyes fixed on him, unblinking, cold, and intelligent. Jake could feel the tension in the air like static. One wrong move, and this thing would strike. The alien girl stirred, her chains rattling softly. She turned her head toward him, her silver-white hair plastered to her face, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak but didn't dare. Her swollen belly rose and fell quickly with each breath, and Jake saw the fear in her eyes, not just fear of the monster, but fear that he might leave her here. He took a cautious step forward. The monster's head tilted, following his every movement. A low, guttural sound rumbled from deep in its chest, vibrating through the metal floor. Jake stopped, his instincts screaming at him to keep his distance. Easy, he muttered under his breath, though he doubted the creature understood. The green light above flickered once. Then again, casting the chamber into brief moments of darkness. Each time the light came back, the monster seemed a little closer, as if it moved when the shadows hit it. Jake's heart pounded in his ears. He needed to figure out what this thing wanted. From the way it stood over the girl, it was clear it was guarding her. But why? Was she a prisoner? Or something worse? The girl tried to speak, her voice hoarse and broken. It was in her own language, soft but urgent. Jake didn't understand the words, but the desperation was clear. She was telling him to run. He shook his head slightly, meeting her gaze. Not leaving you. The monster let out a sudden hiss, the sound sharp enough to make Jake flinch. It straightened to its full height easily. Twice, his own hand stepped aside, just enough for him to see the girl fully. It was almost like it was showing her off, as if to say, "Look at what's mine." Jake's stomach turned. This wasn't just captivity. This was possession. The girl's wrists and ankles were locked in thick. Alien metal cuffs connected two chains bolted deep into the floor. Her bodysuit was torn in places, revealing bruises along her arms. She shivered, not from the cold, but from the weight of whatever nightmare she'd been living. Jake's grip on his weapon tightened. He needed a plan, and fast. The control panel on the far wall caught his eye. Its screen cracked, wires spilling out. If he could get to it, maybe he could release her restraints. But between him and that panel was a very large, very hostile obstacle. The monster took another slow step toward him, claws scraping. It was testing him, measuring him. Jake's training screamed that engaging would be suicide. But his gut said turning back would be worse. The girl made a sudden noise, half cry, half warning, as the monster's head snapped toward her. It moved fast, crouching low beside her, its claws brushing the chain near her leg, not cutting it, just reminding her it was still in control. Jake forced himself to breathe, his mind racing. He had to keep the monster's attention on him, not her. "Yeah, big guy," he said quietly, taking a step to the side. "Eyes on me." The monster's gaze followed. Its head tilted again, almost curious. For a moment, they stared at each other, two predators in a silent standoff. Then the light above flickered out completely, plunging the chamber into total darkness. In that instant, Jake heard movement, fast, heavy splashes in the water. He spun, flashlight snapping on just as the monster's claws slashed through the space where he'd been standing a heartbeat before. The beam caught the edge of its face, smooth, metallic, almost mask-like, before it pulled back into the shadows. The girl gasped, her chains rattling again as she shifted, trying to see what was happening. Jake steadied his aim, his pulse racing. The monster wasn't just strong, it was smart. It was playing with him, and somewhere deep down, he realized this was its territory. Down here, in the dark, it had every advantage. Still, he kept his voice low, steady, and certain. "You're not keeping her." The monster stepped forward again, the light catching on its eyes. And Jake knew the fight for the girl's freedom had already begun, even if no blows had been struck yet. The air in the chamber grew heavy, as if the oxygen itself had thickened. Jake's chest rose and fell faster now, his eyes locked on the black, skeletal figure that stood between him and the alien girl. Water rippled outward from the monster's clawed feet with each slow, deliberate step it took toward him. Its glowing green eyes never blinked, never broke contact, as though it was daring him to try. Behind the creature, the girl shifted weakly, her chains clinking against the floor. Her silver hair clung to her damp cheeks, her swollen belly rising and falling in shallow breaths. She whispered something, soft, broken syllables in her own language. Jake couldn't understand, but he didn't need to. It was a warning. The monster lowered itself, crouching over the girl in a possessive way. One of its claws traced the chain connecting her ankle to the floor, slow and deliberate. It wasn't harming her, not yet, but the message was clear. Mine. Jake felt his blood. He didn't know who she was, why she was here, or how she'd ended up pregnant in the belly of this nightmare. But he knew the look in the monster's eyes. He'd seen it before in predators back on Earth. That wasn't protection. That was ownership. "Not gonna happen," Jake muttered under his breath. The creature's head snapped toward him at the sound, its eyes narrowing. The guttural hiss that followed made the metal walls hum. It rose to its full height again, towering over him, and took a step forward. Jake slid his left foot back, loosening his shoulders. His sidearm was still in his grip, but he didn't raise it yet. The way the monster moved told him everything. This wasn't just a mindless beast. It was intelligent. If he fired too soon, he'd lose the element of surprise. The green emergency light above them flickered again, shadows crawling across the walls. The girl whimpered as the monster's clawed hand hovered over her face for a heartbeat before lowering again, almost like it was showing Jake how easily it could end her. Jake needed a distraction. His eyes darted to the cracked control panel. On the far wall, the one he'd spotted earlier. If that panel still had power, it might control the chain locks. But it was at least 20 feet away, and the monster was dead center between him and it. He made his choice. Jake shifted his weight slightly, letting his boot scrape loudly against the floor. The monster's eyes flicked toward the sound. Just for a second, that was all he needed. He threw his flashlight to the far left side of the chamber. It clattered against the wall, the beam spinning wildly before landing in a shallow pool. Light reflected upward, splashing the ceiling with chaotic shadows. The monster twisted its head toward the noise, and Jake moved fast. He splashed through the water toward the control panel, his sidearm drawn now, heart pounding in his ears. The hiss behind him was loud enough to rattle his bones. He dove toward the panel, landing hard against it. His free hand ripped at the dangling wires, sparks biting his fingers. He didn't have time to guess. He yanked the largest bundle and jammed it against the broken override switch. A metallic clunk echoed across the chamber. The girl gasped. Jake looked back just in time to see the ankle shackle on her left leg. Spring open, the monster roared, a sound so deep it seemed to shake the floor. It spun toward Jake, moving with terrifying speed. He fired. The plasma shot sizzled through the air and struck the creature's shoulder. Steam hissed where the energy burned into its armor-like skin, but instead of falling back, it lunged. Jake barely rolled away in time, the monster's claws slashing the metal where he'd been. Sparks flew, water splashing as the blow sent a deep dent into the floor. He scrambled to his feet, firing again, but the second shot only grazed the creature's side. It was faster than anything that size should be. The girl was trying to pull free, her hands fumbling with the other shackle. Her movements were slow, weak. Jake could see the panic in her eyes as the monster loomed over him again. He fired. A third shot, aiming for its face. The blast hit near its jaw, snapping its head to the side. That gave him just enough time to shove himself toward the girl. "Come on," he barked, grabbing the chain on her other ankle. He yanked hard, trying to break it free, but the lock held. The monster roared again, shaking off the hit. Its claws sliced through the air, close enough for Jake to feel the wind of the strike. He didn't have time to think. He raised his weapon not to shoot the creature, but to fire directly at the chain. The metal glowed red, then burst apart. In a shower of sparks, the girl stumbled forward into his arms, barely able to stand. Jake hauled her up, slinging her arm over his shoulder. The monster's eyes burned brighter now, and its hiss became a roar of pure fury. Jake didn't look back. He splashed toward the nearest tunnel, the girl clinging weakly to him. The sound of claws tearing into metal followed them, closer with every step. The monster had made its claim. Now, Jake had made his, and only one of them would leave the underground alive. The tunnel ahead was nothing but darkness. But Jake didn't slow down. Water splashed high with every step, soaking his boots. His legs burning from the weight of the alien girl leaning against him. She clung to his shoulder, her breath ragged, her steps stumbling every few feet. Her swollen belly pressed against his side, an urgent reminder that she was carrying more than her own life. Behind them, monster's roar rolled through the tunnels, echoing off the walls until it was impossible to tell which direction it was coming from. The sound was deep, primal, and furious. Jake's flashlight beam bobbed wildly as he ran, cutting through the misty air. The tunnel sloped downward for a moment before bending sharply to the right. They burst into a wider section, one that looked less like a mine and more like part of an alien structure. The walls here weren't rock or human metal. They pulsed faintly as though alive, lined with the same strange glowing veins he'd seen earlier. The girl mumbled something in her language, her voice weak but urgent. She pointed with trembling fingers toward a narrow opening on the far side. Jake didn't hesitate. He headed straight for it. A sharp clang rang out behind them, followed by the hiss of metal tearing. Jake risked a glance over his shoulder and saw the monster rounding the corner, its long limbs propelling it forward at terrifying speed. "Damn it," Jake muttered under his breath. He pushed harder, almost dragging the girl now. The narrow passage was barely wide enough for him to fit through with her in tow. As they slipped inside, he pulled a small plasma charge from his tool belt, slapped it against the wall, and hit the activator. The device began to blink red. They stumbled several meters into the passage before the charge went off. The explosion was small but loud, sending a wave of dust and debris into the air. Chunks of metal and rock crashed down, partially blocking the entrance. For a moment, the tunnel was silent except for their breathing. Jake allowed himself a thin smile. Maybe a deep scraping noise came from the other side of the blockage. Then, impossibly, a long black claw punched through the debris, dragging chunks of stone aside. The girl whimpered. Jake's heart sank. "Okay, so that's not going to stop him," he muttered, tightening his grip on her. "We move." They pressed deeper into the narrow passage, which twisted like a serpent. The air was warmer here, the faint hum of machinery somewhere ahead. Jake's mind raced. If this place still had power, maybe it had an elevator, a maintenance lift, something that could take them back to the surface faster than climbing by foot. The tunnel opened into a smaller chamber filled with pools of stagnant water. Broken catwalks hung above, their supports bent and twisted. A control console sat half-submerged near one wall. Flickering weakly, Jake guided the girl to lean against the wall while he waded through the water to the console. The screen's alien script shifted and glowed when he touched it. He didn't understand the words, but he recognized the symbols for power and transport. His fingers flew over the controls, trying different combinations until one lit up bright green. Somewhere above, grinding noise started a platform descending. Jake turned back to the girl, but she was staring past him, her eyes wide with terror. The monster had found another way in. It emerged from a shadowed opening high on the wall, crawling along the bent catwalk like an insect, its claws hooking into the metal. The green glow of its eyes locked on Jake. He drew his sidearm, firing up at it. The plasma bolts hit, sparking off its armor. The creature shrieked but didn't fall, only moved faster. Swinging down toward the water, Jake splashed back to the girl, grabbing her and half-carrying her toward the platform that had now reached the floor. The surface was slick, the air filled with the creature's hissing breath. They stepped onto the platform just as the monster lunged, claws slicing through the air. Jake slammed his hand onto the lift's controls. The platform shuddered, then began to rise, creaking under their combined weight. The monster landed in the water below, sending up a wave that crashed against the platform's base. It looked up, roaring, and leapt its claws, barely missing the edge as they ascended. Jake didn't stop watching until the chamber vanished from view, swallowed by the shadows below. The girl sagged against him, exhausted. Her hand gripped his sleeve as if afraid he'd disappear too. He met her gaze, his voice low but certain. "We're not out yet," he told her, "but I'm getting you topside. Both of you." From the way her eyes softened, he thought she understood, but far below. In the dark, the monster's roar rose again. Jake knew it was already climbing after them. The lift groaned as it rose, the sound of old gears grinding echoing up the narrow shaft. Jake kept one arm tight around the alien girl, steadying her as the platform swayed. Her breathing was shallow, her silver hair clinging to her damp face. She gripped his jacket tightly, her eyes darting nervously to the darkness below. He didn't need to look down to know the monster was still coming. A faint metallic scrape drifted upward, the sound of claws hooking into the shaft walls. It was climbing. Fast, Jake's gaze shot to the lift's console. The old alien tech flashed symbols in rapid sequence, as if sensing the danger. The platform trembled, picking up speed, but it wasn't enough. He looked up. The faint glow of daylight seeped through the opening far above, but it felt impossibly far away. "Hold on," he told her, tightening his grip. A sudden clang from below made the platform shudder. Jake risked a glance down and saw the monster's glowing green eyes closing in. It moved with terrifying speed, its segmented limbs digging into the metal like knives. Come on, Mon," Jake muttered, urging the lift to go faster. The girl murmured something, her voice trembling but firm. She reached into the torn seam of her bodysuit and pulled out a small palm-sized device. It looked like a glowing crystal embedded in a metallic frame. She pressed it into his hand. Jake frowned. "What is this?" She met his eyes, and even without a shared language, he understood. "Use it." The monster was only a few meters below now, claws stretching upward toward the platform. Jake didn't hesitate. He slammed the device against the wall of the shaft. The crystal flared, blinding white, and a pulse of energy exploded outward, rattling the lift and making the air vibrate. The monster shrieked, its body convulsing as the pulse hit. It lost its grip, falling away into the darkness. The echo of its roar faded, swallowed by the deep tunnels below. Jake leaned heavily against the railing, his chest heaving. The girl's hand found his arm, gripping tightly, not in fear, but relief. The lift continued upward until, with a final lurch, it reached the surface. The platform ground to a halt, and a rush of fresh, cold air filled Jake's lungs. Sunlight spilled across the dusty ground as he helped her step off. She squinted at the brightness, her pale skin catching the golden light. For the first time since he'd found her, she didn't look trapped, she looked free. They moved away from the shaft, the wind carrying the faint scent of pine from the distant hills. Jake kept scanning the area, half expecting to see those green eyes in the shadows. But there was nothing, only silence. The girl stumbled slightly, and he caught her. Her hand pressed gently against her belly, and she looked up at him with a softness in her gaze that cut through all the chaos. They'd endured. Jake crouched slightly, so they were eye level. "You're safe now," he told her quietly. "I don't know who you are, but I swear, not letting anything take you back down there." She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek. In her language, she said something that sounded almost like his name. He smiled faintly. "Guess we'll have to work on translations." They started walking toward the horizon, the morning sun climbing higher. Jake kept his weapon ready, knowing that things like that monster didn't always stay dead. But for now, the girls' steps grew steadier, her breathing calmer behind them. Deep in the earth, something shifted. Far below the surface, the monster's claws scraped against metal once more. Its hunt wasn't over. Jake didn't look back. The girl was alive. That was all that mattered. And if the darkness ever came for her again, it would have to go through him first.